Committee on Status of Women. We are in hybrid format. We are going to be hearing from our witnesses and then suspending for our vote. If you would, when you're speaking, wait until you're recognized and then click on your microphone icon to activate your mic. Keep your mic on mute otherwise. Address your comments through the chair, and you obviously will have interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. So let me now welcome our witnesses on our study of sexual misconduct within the Canadian Armed Forces. We have today Rear Admiral Rebecca Patterson, who is the commander of the Canadian Forces Health Services and the Defence Champion for Women, and Master General Jenny Carignan, the Military Personnel Command, and Brigadier General Lise Brugel, who is the Visiting Defense Fellow 2020-2021 at Queen's University and Defense Champion for Women, Peace and Security. Each of you will have 5 minutes for your speeches, and we'll begin with Rear Admiral Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. And good morning to our committee members. So thank you for inviting me today to participate in this committee. And I come to you in my capacity as the Defence Champion for Women. Since I joined the Canadian Armed Forces over 30 years ago, which was, if you think about it, where we started integration of women into all occupations within the Canadian Armed Forces, I have personally witnessed and experienced this great advances for women in the CAF. I've witnessed women becoming fully integrated into all occupations and taking on leadership roles that had never previously been filled by women. In fact, today is quite a moment because it's the first time any parliamentary committee has ever had 3 women general and flag officers as witnesses. Although we've come a long way as part of this evolution, sustainable cultural change is a long-term, progressive and cumulative effort. And we've got to continue to work to reshape our culture to achieve the ultimate goal to be truly equitable, diverse and inclusive. As a Defence Champion for Women and a senior leader in the Canadian Armed Forces, I'm committed to the advancement of employment equity. This includes establishing a positive work environment that values the different perspectives an inclusive workforce brings, while embracing diversity as a strength. The CAF will continue to address the complex challenges still facing women with a comprehensive approach to identify and eliminate barriers that prevent women from serving Canada to their absolute full potential. Recruiting and retaining women and other diverse groups is seen as absolutely critical for long-term sustainable culture change within the Canadian Armed Forces. And we have seen growth in numbers, but we realize that we're going to have to continue to recruit and retain amazing women who wish to serve their nation in the Canadian Armed Forces. As a Defence Champion for Women, I remain committed to championing the voice of women by advocating for the desired cultural change. And as champion, I'm also in a position to give voice to women's concerns and represent CAF and defence women at senior leadership forums. The Defence Women's Advisory Organization is one such group through which women of the defence team can connect, express their concerns, and be heard. Through this forum, we identify systemic issues that are brought forward so that the CAF and the department can address the conditions of service, just so we stop with barriers that impact women's ability to serve effectively. The CAF recognizes that long-term sustainable culture change requires commitment and engagement at all ranks, from tactical to strategic. However, we also recognize that we have a long way to go yet. Establishing a culture of belonging, dignity, and justice will help unite us. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. That's great. And now we'll go on to Master General Carignan. 5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, committee members, it is a pleasure to appear before you today alongside my teammates. I am Major General Jenny Carignan. I have recently returned from leading NATO mission Iraq, and I am transitioning into the position of Assistant Chief of Military Personnel in the CAF. We have incredible people in the Canadian Armed Forces doing difficult and often dangerous work, and I am constantly inspired by them, which is the reason why I am still serving today. Between my colleagues and myself, we have an accumulated experience of close to 100 years in the armed forces. My own experience as a woman, a soldier, and a leader has been both very demanding and rewarding. I have had the privilege to lead troops on expeditionary operations ranging from traditional peacekeeping to combat to capacity building, as well as at home here in Canada in support of provincial authorities. Over the course of my career as a CAF member, I have faced three main obstacles. First, the perception that women are weak. Second, the perception that women can't perform in a combat environment. And third, the perception that women can't be soldiers and mothers at the same time. I have observed over the years that men, in fact, face the same obstacles, but we simply choose to ignore them because our perceptions about men are different. The spotlight remains focused on women. For all serving members of the Canadian Armed Forces, overcoming these obstacles is both a matter of individual determination and especially having the support and guidance of peers and leaders that want us to realize our full potential. This is what we mean by a strong military ethos, that you support your sisters and brothers in arms at all ranks so that they can be their best in the service of Canada. Regrettably, in some instances, this guiding ethos has been lost. I believe that sexual misconduct is a symptom of a wider problem linked to a portion of our culture that must be changed. While we have to appreciate that our military culture is what allows Canadians to put themselves in danger in defense of Canada, we as leaders have to remain extremely vigilant and self-aware of the toxic elements that this same culture can produce. When we see wrongdoing at any level, we must act swiftly and fairly. We must foster a culture free from fear of reprisal for speaking out and reporting. As mentioned by my colleagues, culture change requires a sustained effort by every CAF member to ensure that our behaviors, our attitudes, and our beliefs align with our values. This is why we continue to work to build a Canadian Armed Forces that reflects and celebrates the uniqueness and strength of all Canadians. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Brigadier General. And now we will go on to Brigadier General Bourgon for 5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear alongside my colleagues today.
Defense Fellow at Queen's University, and also the Canadian Armed Forces Champion for Women, Peace and Security. Cela fait plus de 33.
It has been more than 33 years since I began my military life as an officer cadet at the Royal Military College Saint-Jean.
A maritime helicopter pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force, I have seen and experienced many of the unique challenges faced by women in the Canadian Armed Forces. Néanmoins,
nevertheless, I believe in the importance of the CAF and its mission, as well as in its ability to learn and adapt as an institution.
When I joined the Canadian Armed Forces in the late 80s, women had to change to fit in because it was a man's world. As one of the first women aircrew to sail on naval ship, I had to forcefully make my way in and was even thrown out of a ship because of my gender. But slowly, attitudes have changed. Women made their way. We showed that we belong and that we can make a difference. So slowly, the CAF evolved. From being merely tolerated, women were accepted and welcome. En effet,
Indeed, there has been great progress achieved in the last 35 years, and many barriers have been removed. But there are still challenges ahead of us also.
Sexual misconduct remains an issue for the women and men of the CAF. Any form of sexual misconduct within the ranks is unacceptable. It arms CAF members, jeopardizes operational effectiveness, and is inconsistent with our values and ethical principle. Il y a encore du travail à faire.
There is more work to do to address these challenges, including the structural and cultural inequalities that remain in play in the CAF.
As part of my fellowship at Queen's University, my research has focused on the integration of women in the Canadian Armed Forces through greater inclusion. Integration is allowing people to come in. However, inclusion recognizes and embraces those differences so that all people feel valued, important, and have equitable opportunities. Il est donc temps
So it is time to embrace these differences and create the conditions for men, women, Indigenous peoples, members of the LGBTQ2+ community, and visible minorities to be their best, fueled by a sense of mutual respect, dignity, safety, and true belonging.
Opportunity to build a CAF that our people deserve and that all Canadians expect. J'attends vivement la
I'm looking forward to the question period. Thank you for your attention.
Very good. It's so exciting to have three powerful women from the Canadian Armed Forces here to testify. What we're going to do now is we're going to suspend the meeting so that we can go and do the vote, and then we'll return afterwards to begin the rounds of questioning. It could be 15 or 20 minutes, I would expect. So we'll suspend. Thank you. Lav for 6 minutes. Do we have Miss Alice Lav? Let's go with Miss Zahid for 6 minutes and I'll come back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for appearing before the committee today and providing your important input. My first question is for General Carignan. Thank you for taking time to provide your input in this study. We can't highlight enough the importance of having a survivor-centric, trauma-informed, and feminist lens to sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. So, General Carignan, you have had an extensive career serving both internationally and as well as domestically. What was the culture in the Canadian Armed Forces in the early stages of your career, where you see it now, and what would be your recommendations going forward?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. My sense of culture and culture change is that it's always a journey. It is not an event. And we have engaged on a few cultural change that I have witnessed over the my 35 years in the service. We have grown into a different military since I joined in 1986, and I have seen great progress. The military has changed between when I was there, and I have a daughter and a son as well in the military, and I've seen changes. But it is clear that we now need to take this further. So it constantly needs a vigilance over our own culture to make sure that we keep its qualities while working on the toxic elements, if I can express myself that way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
My second question is for Admiral Peterson. Admiral Peterson, when it comes to sexual misconduct, survivors have experienced negative effects on their mental health and physical well-being. Given the impact on both the body and mind, how important is it to have trauma-informed services and policy changes? You are on mute. No. Can't hear you.
Look, there's a
Can we please suspend? We are having audio problems.
Let's suspend momentarily. You won't lose your time, Ms. Zahid.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Admiral Peterson, were you able to hear my question, or should I repeat the question again?
Madam Chair, it probably would help if you could just repeat the question. Thank you.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, hope I will get my time.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. We are so Admiral Peterson. Just when it comes to sexual misconduct, survivors have experienced negative effects on their mental health and physical well-being. So, given the impact on both the body and the mind, how important is it to have trauma-informed services and policy changes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think first and foremost, what we really need to do is be preventing these incidents from happening in the first place. So as we approach this, I think we need to look at it from a prevention perspective. And it takes a number of forms. Primary prevention means we create programs and systems and policies and structures and training so that people are not likely to cause incidents to happen. We then go into secondary, look at things like how we can do better bystander intervention training. And then I'll talk about survivors. So this is where it is absolutely critical. We put this first and foremost in looking at how we better support survivors. So your comment about trauma-informed communication, it doesn't just come from the healthcare sector, but it needs to be the approach for all communication for people who've survived through traumatic events. But with that, it can't just be how we speak, it has to be how we support, both from a healthcare perspective, having the right programs that are targeted for people who've experienced sexual trauma, but also even within the chain of command, within our other different structures within the Canadian Armed Forces, that all people know how to approach those that have been harmed. And bottom line up front, it has to be from the perspective of the person who has been harmed. Thank you.
Admiral, do you think that any health-related considerations can inform our policy recommendations?
From my perspective, in my day job, I can tell you that one thing that is always of great benefit is making sure that we are able to focus on the targeted research that's required to look at the impacts of trauma of all types on women and other marginalized groups. The majority of research done in Canada, of course, is not on the groups that we are talking about today. So certainly in terms of research in healthcare would be extremely beneficial. Moving forward is looking at all of our programs and basically putting a sex and gender-based lens to make sure that we identify if we have gaps, where those gaps are. Because at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is ensure that all people within the Canadian Armed Forces, regardless of where they're coming from, are getting the care that they require that meets their unique and distinct needs.
Thank you, Admiral. One more question. Now we have seen that there is Stats Canada data around Canadian Armed Forces members reporting sexual misconduct. So what are your main takeaways from the data which is available?
I will take this from my perspective as a commander, and also in terms of the voices of the women in the Canadian Armed Forces. I think what I take away from it is that we still have a lot of work to do in creating an environment where people actually feel that they can come forward and share what has happened to them. So not only can we make sure that we protect them to the best of their ability as they move through the processes, but also work on prevention programs in order to determine why these things happened, who's doing these things, what can we do to actually move forward and maybe have less people having to report in the first place.
Very good. Now we'll go to Ms. Ellison for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to just open by saying what an honor and a privilege it is to be with you, the witnesses today, and to say that all of us were junior officers in the late 1980s where we started our careers. And if I could be so bold as to take a moment to say, wow, we haven't done half bad, eh? And this is just a testimony to why we make a meaningful contribution to the Canadian Forces, whether we decide to stay for our entire career or whether or not we go and do other things. And this is the value in the contribution that sometimes gets overlooked, but that women make to our society and why it's so important. So what a gift for us to have. But the depressing part, of course, is that we're here to talk about something that is so serious and so significant, and shows that perhaps we haven't made all the progress that we need to have made in the last 30 years. So my question is, the military is highly effective at setting objectives, performance metrics, measuring against them, and determining if we're achieving those outcomes. Could you share with me the metrics around the number of women per classification, per rank? Do we know how many are remaining in rank relative to the men before they get promoted? What is our attraction and retention rate by classification and trade? All those kinds of things. Could you give me an idea of what we're measuring and how we're doing against those metrics?
Madam Chair, if you like, I can take this one. So those metrics do exist. Unfortunately, I don't have them with me today. So if we could take that question on notice, and we can provide that information for you.
What I'm actually looking for is just what is measured. I mean, yes, I'd love to see what the actual numbers are, but can you confirm that we do have a strategy, and B, that we measure by trade, by classification, the number of women and how we're keeping them, if they tend to leave earlier than men, if they get promoted at the same rate as men, all those kinds of time and rank retention. Are we measuring all those things and therefore doing something about it?
So, Madam Chair, I can confirm that we do have metrics on that. It comes through a number of different forms. It could be a social science research done through Director General DGRMPRA, our research arm within the Canadian Armed Forces. They certainly have that type of information, as well as regular reporting on statistics in terms of percentage by occupation, by gender, by where they're located, and most certainly that's a question that we can take on order, and we will get more detail for.
Who's accountable for that? What mechanism reviews that data to see if we're doing better or worse, and who's accountable for it?
Madam Chair, that the data is actually held in the Chief of Military Personnel Command, and so that is who holds that information and reports on it.
Yes, but they're a reporting organization, not an accountability for changing the metrics and ensuring we move against them. So yes, they're the data collection guys and they can tell you, but who's accountable for making sure that the time and rank on average is the same for women and men? Who's ensuring that the retention rate for Master Corporal supply techs is the same regardless of gender or minority? Who's accountable to be watching and taking action?
Madam Chair, that is a great question. And as you know, all members of the Canadian Armed Forces have unique and distinct reasons why they remain in the Canadian Armed Forces for certain periods of time. So equal is not necessarily equitable. So I think it's very important that the data that we collect, we're able to go beyond counting and do a little deeper dive on what that actually means. And that progress is starting and it's underway. And again, I have to say, we know we've got a lot more work to do. I think the greatest advancement for us is the fact that we're even taking that data in and actually collecting that data to start with.
And how long? Go ahead.
Brigadier General, you wanted to say something?
Yes, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add that we're doing very well at understanding why women join the military and also why women leave the military. So every time someone leaves the military, there's a survey, an exit survey that is being done where we ask the question, why are you leaving? So this is being tracked, and we are looking at those results so that we can put initiatives for retention for women and minority group to keep them, because retention is more, well, I mean, recruitment is very, very important, but retention is even more important. And for every person that leaves the military, they need to be replaced. And we need to keep tracking and really doing some changes so that we can recruit and retain our people longer.
And do we have a high
Excellent.
level of confidence?
I'm sorry, that's your time. Madame Larouche.
Ms. Larouche, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our 3 witnesses who have confirmed the importance of working to improve the retention and the status of women in the armed forces. We hope that the latest complaints will lead to progress for women. So I want to congratulate all 3 of our witnesses. As somebody mentioned, you have over 100 years of experience put together, and so that's amazing. I want to come back to your presentations in my first round. Ms. Patterson, you talked about a forum, consultations. I would like to hear a little bit more from you about that and how women can regain their trust.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for the question. I apologize for the delay. There was a little cut there. The group that I'm talking about is the Defense Women's Advisory Organization. And under our employment equity program, we have employment equity groups for women, for visible minorities, for Indigenous persons, and persons with disabilities. And these groups, again, come from both the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence, because we work together and we are one team. So what these forums are, they're voluntary groups that exist on every base and wing across Canada, pretty much every base and wing. And what they do is they give chances for people to get together, to have a conduit for a voice, to share successes, but also to pass up concerns. So then what that means is we have annually a conference where all the national co-chairs of these defense organizations come together so they can actually share with senior leadership in the whole of the department things that we need to look at to address barriers to true equity and inclusion within the Canadian Armed Forces. The next layer to this group, of course, is the champions that you've heard about. So people like myself as Champion for Women also give them a voice within the most senior leadership levels. And I will add that I have a co-chair who is a Chief Warrant Officer Crystal Harris. And what it does is the intent is to try and address some of the barriers to actually speaking in a hierarchical structure. And so we have very active men and women in the Canadian Armed Forces who are very willing to share their impressions of what's going on. And I'm sorry, I meant to add that we have very recently stood up the LGBTQ2+ Defense Team Pride Network, which I've been connected to and I'm very proud of.
Well, of course, your forum and it's important, and you are the champion, and so maybe you will have some recommendations. But now I have a question for Ms. Carignan. You talked about lower representation of women. You talked about the military ethos, sexual misconduct being a much wider problem. So could you talk about that a little bit more? You talked about this being a symptom and that it was important to create a culture where there were not reprisals for people who brought up incidents. because we've heard that victims were victims of reprisals. So what can be done to avoid that kind of situation where these women who are victims of sexual misconduct receive this kind of treatment? Thank you. And through the chair, the military culture in itself is one that enables people to do extraordinary things as a team. The values that enable these people and teams to face very dangerous situations are very good values, basically. For example, obedience, loyalty, the fighting spirit. These are all things that are very important so that our teams are cohesive. That said, if these values are not disciplined, then we can have a toxic culture within our teams. And very quickly, bullying can be confused with leadership, arrogance with self-confidence, and lies with loyalty. So very quickly, if we do not have strong discipline, then we have these problems and we get a bad dynamic in the hierarchy, and we get unprofessional conduct in some cases. So I could certainly go on, but I hope I've answered your question. Yes, of course. And I will end my first turn. I'm afraid your time is up. Thank you.
Ms. Matheson, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I too want to express my gratitude to see such strong leaders, women in your roles. My questions, you all spoke about these changes, and while slow, that they are happening, and that's good to hear. The Status of Women Committee, this committee did a study of course, Canadian Armed Forces and women serving in 2019. And what the committee heard was really quite disturbing in some regards. And clearly there was a need for change. So I want to ask a few questions in terms of even just in these last few years, if there have been changes from that. For example, there were stories of women. They came forward and they talked about starting their basic or actually even leadership training, and that all future soldiers have to go through medical, like a medical test, various tests. They check their proficiencies and so on, and that all women have to have pregnancy tests, and before they can even start their course in any way, shape, or form. Women who are pregnant are often removed, even from the beginning, from those training courses. Is that still the practice, and or has that stopped? Because ultimately, I see that as a discriminatory practice.
Madam Chair, as in my day job in health services, probably I should take that question. I have to admit that I don't have the answer to you, and I think what would do justice to you is if I took that question on notice, and then we can provide you with the response, provide you some context around that as well.
Absolutely perfect. I know, so we heard specifically, well, in 2019, the committee heard specifically from Ms. Nash, and she started naval officer training. She became pregnant, and one of you, I think it was Madame Carignan, you talked about this misperception of women who serve, but they can't also at the same time be mothers. And because of Ms. Nash's pregnancy, she was immediately removed from her environmental training program. She was denied the opportunity to even start within that program. So I'm wondering if you could talk about and expand upon potentially, hopefully, the changes that you've seen, even just from a few years ago, if that's changed from what you've seen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. There is a couple of issues, factors that we have to take into account with, personally with pregnancies and also as a commander, is we have to make sure that the mother and the baby are safe, that we provide a safe environment for them, and that operationally we can continue the mission. And then thirdly, we want to make sure that she is supported through this process and that her career is not being impacted by the pregnancy. So there are currently policies to manage pregnancies, but policies don't necessarily cover all of the cases, and we have to exercise judgment and work this with the service woman and her particular condition. So this is a multi-layered and not a simple problem, or not a simple to manage, because we're talking about a person that we want to make sure that we support through this, and at the same time support her career. So the policies could probably be reviewed to be more focused towards women. There's work to be done in that sense. I think General Bourgon has done extensive work in that field, and she could probably expand on more of the policies to support specifically women throughout their service.
Okay, and certainly, Ms. Bourgon, if you could expand, but I think key here is that they shouldn't necessarily be entirely removed from leadership. There are other ways that they could continue to serve, continue to provide that leadership, be encouraged along those leadership paths.
Absolutely. There's many options to be explored. There's various solutions to each case, and it's not a one size fits all, that's for sure.
Okay. So one of the other things that we heard, and I'll just switch gears a little bit, but we heard in that 2019 testimony that when there is a different definition of sexual assault within the Canadian Armed Forces than there is within the Criminal Code of Canada. To your knowledge, has that changed? Does that still exist? Do you see this as a problem?
Madam Chair, the definition of sexual assault is the same as in the criminal code because it is a criminal code case. I can comment on that. Did I answer your question?
Yes, very good. And that's your time. So now we're going to Ms. Wong in the second round for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then, also congratulations to all our 3 witnesses. We are so proud of your achievement in the military. My questions relate to Admiral Patterson. And in your opening remarks, you mentioned that you're the commander of the Canadian Force Health Service, and also is your secondary duty as the defense champion for women. And you also listed some of the responsibilities. So to be more accurate, I mean more detailed. So as defense champion for women, who do you report to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As defense champion, there are 2 functional leads that I work with, and one of them is ADM HR Civ, Mr. Kin Choi, to look after the women of the department, and also the Chief of Military Personnel Command, and for the military aspects. However, one of the roles of a champion is to be able to basically transcend the chain of command. So if there is an issue that is brought forward, as champion, I can talk down didn't come out right. I could talk to people from the tactical level right up to the Chief of Defence Staff or the Deputy Minister if required. And I have certainly used that privilege in order to support the needs of women.
So as the champion, defense champion, so that is only a part-time job. So do you think that that is not enough? Then maybe it should be made into a full-time job so that you can function in that capacity more fully?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a very rich and meaningful secondary duty. I have to admit, it's something I'm obviously quite passionate about, regardless of my gender. And I think that, especially as we move forward, that making sure that we have the proper mechanisms in place to ensure that there is a champion for women's voice that's available easily and readily is going to be quite important. So we certainly welcome any recommendations the committee has.
Now I have a couple questions to all of you. So should there be an independent investigative and review authority with regard to our topic of discussion right now, like misconduct?
I can certainly start and share the conversation with my colleagues. And I think as we move forward, we need to remain open to anything and any structures and external advice and support that makes sense to help us move forward in terms of change. And I'm talking about the men and the women of the CAF Believe This. When we talk about thinking about things in a way we've never thought about them before, we need to be open and ready to look at anything that will help us move forward. And respectfully, may I pass that to actually General Burgoyne? Would you like to comment on that or add?
Well, I think as you said, we need to listen. We need to listen to the experts because we're going to need help. So external authority or the experts from the civilian side coming to help us to change our culture. So, one way or another, we are all listening and we're looking for options, and we are welcoming the committee's recommendation.
Thank you. And then I would like to ask a second question for all of you. We heard from a woman who conducted training in Royal Military College and was met with ridicule and her message discounted. In your opinion, is the current training meeting the objectives? If not, what should be changed? I used to be an educator. That's why I'm interested in this question.
To me, we always go back to the culture. We have a lot of great guidelines and policies in terms of training. However, there is a gap between what we say and what we do. And we will definitely need to have a look to change our culture onto the how we do things. We should have a look at our manners and how are they in line with the values that we actually all support. So in action, culture can be changed through daily actions. We'll need to look at how we recruit, how we train, how we conduct physical fitness training, how we promote and select, and what it is that we reward. So we will have to review our manners or how we do these things in our daily activities.
Very good. And now we'll go to Ms. Hutchings for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I too echo the sentiments of my colleagues. It's such an honor to be with you, ladies. You're true champions, and it's obvious you've broken many glass ceilings to get where you are, and I know you're going to break many more as you work on the challenges. I have a question for each of the witnesses. Could you discuss the relationship between the Canadian Armed Forces and the Military Family Resource Centres? How would increased investments in the MFRC support the atmosphere and overall well-being of CAF members? And how would a in an increase in access to childcare impact CAF members and their families? Starting with you first, Rear Admiral.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The relationship with the Canadian Armed Forces and the MFRC is a collaborative one. And the MFRC's is a collaborative one. But I think I need to go back to families. The Canadian Armed Forces is not a group of individuals who serve. We are nothing without our families. And if you care for your families, you care for the service member. There are many pressures that come with being a service members. Myself, my experiences as a married service couple, I have 2 children. And one of the biggest challenges for me was frequently moving unexpectedly or deployed. And if I did not have the military family resource centers there to help support me, particularly in terms of childcare, I actually have to tell you, I don't know how I would have coped. So therefore, childcare, when I talk with the women of the CAF, is a very critical issue. It benefits mothers and fathers and non-binary parents. It benefits everybody. But one thing that we do find is the challenge is every time you move, you're bopped to the bottom of a childcare list, and it makes things challenging. So one of our priorities that we hear very often is about getting access to universal, accessible, quality childcare that goes more than just 9 to 5, that meets the hours of service members. So I can tell you, families are as much a part of our culture and where we need to go with culture change and how we look after them as dealing with things that are internal to our force structure.
Great, thank you for that, Major Kerrigan. Would you like to add, Major General? Would you like to add anything to that?
Madam Chair, Rear Admiral Patterson says it all. With my 4 children, it has been an uphill battle every time we moved, and our service members all need childcare in order to be able to do their jobs properly. Thank you.
And thank you. And to you, Brigadier General Bourgeon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I think as part of my studies on inclusion, that is one of the big things that we've realized is that, women and men are different, and we have to look at those differences, and we need to ensure there's programs for filling in those gaps. And we've seen that the traditional role of women is still there, taking care of the children, their parents at home. So we have to ensure for women and men also that family is supported. And I'll just, reinforce the message that Rear Admiral Patterson said. 57% of our military family don't have access to daycare through our military family resource center because there's not enough capacity. 57%. And 30% of the people that, the women anyway, that are releasing from the military indicate that, childcare is one of the considerable reason why they leave. So it's really, really important to focus on that, because that is how we're going to value our women serving in the forces and how we are going to keep them serving. As I said earlier, the retention is super important. So that family piece is critical.
Thank you for that. And we all know that Seamless Canada is one of DND's initiatives, to help address the challenges of families being posted in various positions and moving from province to province. Which of you would like to comment on that initiative? You, Rear Admiral?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have kind of an arm's length understanding, but Seamless Canada is an absolute essential service, not only to connect as our military families move all around the country to try and smooth out access to healthcare. Childcare is part of it, but again, that's a provincially run issue. But I can tell you it also benefits our veterans. It's making sure that along with our families moving, that it remains seamless. And when you're looking at what service truly means to women and men, it means basically we talk cradle to grave. So from the moment of enrollment until you may no longer be on this earth. So making sure that projects such as Seamless Canada remain supported and empowered. And I think the work is really important that they are doing right now, and that we continue to expand towards VAC and within the provinces and territories to help make transition for families easier. I think it's quite important. So it's a very positive project.
Thank you for your service.
Madame Larouche, 2.5.
You have 2.5 minutes, Ms. Larouche.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to continue with my questions to the witnesses, and so I have a question for Ms. Bourgon. You mentioned in your presentation that women have more challenges than men, and that this can affect operational performance. You also talked about structural inequalities and things that are needed to promote the rights of minorities. So could you talk a little bit more about that? Thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned, my topic this year for my research has been the inclusion of women, to see how women and other minorities can be better valued. Because at the end of the day, we're different, but diversity is our strength. So we need to support diversity. As I mentioned, there are cultural and structural barriers and inequalities, but it is throughout our organization, even through our policies and so on. So we need to support our staff. We find that there is, though, a bias against women, and we have to look at how we promote people, how we reward them. We have to promote a type of inclusive leadership. How do we identify leaders who are more inclusive? We have infrastructure and policies that aren't well adapted to women. We have facilities, we have uniforms and equipment that is really designed for men's bodies. And that can create more danger for women because they don't have what they need. We also need to look at our teaching, our training, to make sure that our ethos and our values are well integrated in there. When we look at cultural and gender intelligence, that is also important. We know that men and women don't react to this in the same way. Women are not weak. Just because a woman cries, it doesn't mean that she can't deal with the situation. It's just a way of reacting. So we need to understand these differences between men and women and respect them. So those are small things in our overall culture. We need to work toward greater inclusivity.
Listen for 2.5.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I truly appreciate hearing about the need for accessible, affordable, universal childcare. It's certainly something that this committee has heard a lot. And I'd like to actually have you expand on that. We're also doing studies on the responsibility unpaid care work of women. And so if you could expand in terms of that need for childcare. Of course, there are stresses on women for elder care as well, family care, those needing more. How are there supports in place for you with that? What would you put forward as a recommendation in terms of that extended, those unpaid care roles on women, generally, but also through the armed forces, especially as you talked about having to travel all the time or be away from those homes?
Madam Chair, I will take this. So it's very interesting to see that traditional role that women are still. My survey, the research I did again showed that women have, actually men have 1 more hour every day of free time, because women are busier with child and parents and groceries and everything else. So our women soldiers are a lot busier than their counterpart, and we have to take that into consideration. Also, the military, we are posted all over the world, all over Canada, away from our family. I mean, I've never been a very close, well, I'm super close to my mom, but not in physical space because I was in Halifax, she was in Ottawa. So when you have an emergency, daycare is really the source of stress. Daycare from the time when we move, because as we said, there's up to a year of wait time for access to under the age of 5. So it's very difficult when you move. You don't have access to family because you're very far from family. You need to find daycare because the operational world starts. You get posted and you deploy right away. So that access to daycare is super important, but also access to shift care. The military doesn't work from 9 to 5. We work 24/7. So access to shift and also access to emergency. I mean, I remember flying Sea King and landing in a parking lot, and my husband was at sea. The daycare closed at 6. I was not there to go pick up my children. Like, who's going to do that? So it's important to have those mechanisms in place so that we provide support for men and women, mostly women, because again, that traditional value. And if we want to keep our personnel, that's what we have to provide.
Very good. I just want to thank our witnesses and to say again how proud and thankful we are for your service. And I apologize as well for the delays from the voting that we had. Now, to the committee, I just want to check, are you all okay to stay until about 1:30 so that we can have a fulsome panel for the second one? I'm seeing some nodding. We don't need to suspend. We've already sound checked. And so then we'll go right into our second panel. I want to welcome our witnesses. We have, again, from the Department of National Defense, Brigadier General Atherton, who is the Director General of Professional Military Conduct, as well as Dr. Denise Preston, the Executive Director of the Sexual Misconduct Response Center. And each of you will have 5 minutes to bring your remarks, and we'll begin with the Brigadier General.
Madame la Présidente, il n'y a pas de traduction.
I'm not getting interpretation. I just want to make that.
Can you check on the translator? Is it coming? Can you hear me now with the translation? Oui.
Yes, now I can hear. Thank you.
On peut commencer avec.
We'll begin then with Brigadier General Atherton.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss the work that the Canadian Armed Forces has undertaken to prevent and address sexual misconduct over the past 6 years. As introduced, I'm Brigadier General Andrew Atherton, and I'm the Director General of Professional Military Conduct. My organization leads the strategic level planning and coordination for the CAF's efforts to address sexual misconduct. Our primary focus has been to develop the foundational policies, procedures, and programs needed to support Operation Honor and the CAF's wider efforts to promote institutional culture change. As we heard from Lieutenant General Eyre on March 24th, Operation Honor has culminated, and it's time to transition to a new approach. We are developing a way forward plan that will focus on culture change. As part of that work, we'll take stock of Operation Honor and we'll see what has worked and more importantly, what hasn't. We all know that there's still a lot more progress to be made. We also know that despite our best intentions, we haven't always gotten things right. That said, there's no question that the work accomplished through Operation Honor will provide a solid foundation for any effort as we move forward. Since 2015, the CAF has made steady progress implementing a range of programs, policies, and practices needed for addressing sexual misconduct, and most importantly, providing the support for those who have been affected by it. The recommendations that were made by Madame Deschamps in 2015, following her external review, have been our touchstone throughout, and we have taken steps to address all 10 of the recommendations. In addition, we have responded to the recommendations from parliamentary committees, the Auditor General, and from external advisors. We have also actively engaged with experts from the Sexual Misconduct Response Center to ensure that our approaches were informed and appropriate. We also know we must move beyond a reactive approach focused on incident response if we're to achieve enduring culture change. We need to target the elements of our institutional culture that are enabling sexual misconduct within our ranks. And we need to engage all of our members because we know that their support and their contribution will be key to our long-term success. Culture change must be a collaborative effort, and we all have a role to play. Which is why we developed in the fall a comprehensive long-term culture change strategy for preventing and addressing sexual misconduct. The Path to Dignity and Respect, or simply known and referred to as the PATH. It is informed by and is sensitive to the experiences of those who have been affected by sexual misconduct in the CAF. It also draws on research, evidence, and recommendations from subject matter experts and other stakeholders. While the PATH is by no means the final word on culture change in the CAF, it's a significant step in the right direction. We know that we have significant work to do to advance these efforts, but also to remedy past wrongs and to restore trust. We will listen, we will learn, and we will act. At this time, Madam Chair, I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. And then we'll have Dr. Preston for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. My name is Dr. Denise Preston, and I'm a forensic and clinical psychologist with over 30 years of experience dealing with harmful and criminal behavior. I've been the executive director of the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, or SMRC, since May of 2017. I work with a team of dedicated professionals with a range of expertise in a variety of fields, including counseling, trauma, policy, prevention, perpetrators, and research. SMRC's mandate consists of 3 broad pillars: to provide support services to Canadian Armed Forces members who are affected by sexual misconduct, to provide expert advice on all aspects of sexual misconduct in the CAF, including policy, prevention, reporting, and research, and to monitor the CAF's progress in addressing sexual misconduct. All of our counselors who provide support are civilians who do not have the duty to report. The SMRC is committed to providing confidential and comprehensive support to any CAF member who reaches out and to ensuring members feel safe, supported, and heard. Over and above our mandate, we are pleased to be leading the development of a restorative engagement program as part of the final settlement agreement related to sexual misconduct, as well as the development of a national survivor support strategy. Both of these initiatives are innovative, have the potential to be transformative, and are informed by external subject matter experts as well as survivors. As many of you know from my past experiences, I report directly to the Deputy Minister of National Defence. As such, I'm independent of the chain of command and do not speak on behalf of the Canadian Armed Forces. However, my team and I do work closely with the CAF to ensure that we meet the needs of CAF members and the organization. The SMRC has evolved significantly in the 5 years since its inception. Demand for our services and expertise has increased over these 5 years, and we have helped shape various CAF policies and programs to respond to sexual misconduct. Despite the work that has been done, there is undeniably more to do. We need to continue to foster meaningful culture change in order to address the sexualized culture. We need to enhance prevention programs to better target higher risk groups. We need to simplify reporting and make it safe for those who come forward. We need to promote processes and recourse mechanisms that are trauma-informed and survivor-centric. We also need to increase access to specialized care and support services. Of utmost importance is that we need to ensure that all of these efforts are informed by survivors. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Very good. Thank you as well. And we will begin our first round of questions with Ms. Sahota for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing here today and your testimony. General, you are the Director General of Professional Military Conduct, a recently new structure. This past Tuesday, we had the Provost Marshal appear before committee, and he informed the committee that he reports to the Vice Chief of the Defense Staff, who in turn reports to the Chief of the Defense Staff. He also insisted that his office and those under his command are independent. However, there's been reports in the media of investigation by the CFNIS having been, quote, interfered, end quote, with by senior officers. While we understand that on paper, the Provost Marshal is able to say they are independent, but given that they are ranked officers in the military and the media reports of interference with investigations, what would you recommend to not only say that they are independent, but that they appear to the members of the military and Canadians that they are actually independent?
Madam Chair, thank you very much for the question. As you could well imagine, the Provost Marshal is probably best suited to answer that question. But I will say that the Provost Marshal does exist as an independent from the chain of command. They adhere to Canadian police standards, and they carry themselves and they adhere to a strong standard that allows them to operate independently.
General, you touched on this a bit, but in your opinion, what would you hope to achieve in this role?
In my role?
Yes.
So my role is, as I indicated, is to reinforce the work that has been done by a lot of people that have got us to this point. We can't lose sight of the fact there's a lot of work and a lot of investment, academic investment, personal investment, and emotional investment has gone into developing Operation Honor to get it to this state where we're at now. The release of the path through the fall is a culmination of that effort, and we just need to carry on and continue to reinforce the great work that has resulted from that. That is very much focused on identifying those aspects of our culture that we need to reinforce, as well as identifying those things that have a toxic effect that we need to eliminate.
What measures will you take to ensure men and women in uniform are behaving in accordance to the Code of Service Discipline?
Everybody within the armed forces has a role to play in this, and it doesn't matter whether you're at the strategic level or at the tactical level. It's important that there's a requirement for adherence to the Code of Service Discipline. The measures that we will take will be continue to ensure that the chain of command is actively engaged in the process, and leaders at every level understand where they fit and understand that the role that they play on unit culture and on culture chain.
So in your opinion, does the Code of Service Discipline reflects a clear and concise definition of fraternalization, abuse of authority, and sexual misconduct?
So every number of years, the Code of Service Discipline and the National Defense Act goes through an independent review, and that independent review is going on right now. And those sorts of things that have been brought up, Madam Chair, can form part of that analysis that was going through. And as we look at how we move forward with Operation Honor, some of those things that were identified that may in fact be barriers to reporting, that may have in fact been some of the negative aspects of where we thought we are, will certainly be part of that process.
Like I said before, it's a recently new role that you have, a structure that was created. Can you tell me a bit about why did they decide to create this position?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's an evolution of the position. It began with the sexual misconduct response team that was stood up in 2015, 2016, and it's been continuing evolving from there. But certainly when I took over the responsibilities in just after Labor Day, the intent was to look at all those broader parts of misconduct, not solely on sexual misconduct, but started looking at it in a much broader term and looking at culture as a whole.
And what measures and policies will be in place to ensure that progress is being made regarding misconduct?
So one of the biggest elements of the path that we released in the fall was a performance measurement framework. And that was identified through the Auditor General report a number of years ago. So a big part of that is the PMF, where we will look at how we have done. We'll continually measure ourselves. And so when we released the path, it was not meant to be a one shot and then we're done. It was meant to be a continuous concerted effort. And part of that was a method by which we measure how we are performing. And that can come in a number of different ways, whether it's through reporting, through unit surveys, unit command climate surveys, how we select our leaders, and a number of different factors.
Would you like me to jump in there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So specifically, how are you being measured and what outcomes do you need to deliver?
So me personally, in terms of my organization, Madam Chair, is that what you
Yes.
refer to?
Yes.
So it's important to understand that I work very collaboratively with a number of different stakeholders across the CAF, across the department, and internal to our organization. So we will be measured on how we get these policies out, how we work with those organizations, and more importantly, how we are getting the message down to the various command teams all across the CAF, both from the strategic to the tactical level.
Very good. And then we'll go to Ms. Sidhu for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, our witnesses, for appearing before our committee. We appreciate the work that you both do within your respective departments. My first question to Dr. Pearson. Can you elaborate on the mandate of the CMRC and the necessity of its services?
So,
Dr. Preston?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. So as I mentioned, the mandate has 3 broad lines of effort. The first and most important is to provide a range of support services for members who are affected by sexual misconduct. The second is to provide a range of policy advice, advice on content of prevention programs, on research programs, things like that. And the third one is to monitor CAF's implementation of Operation Honor efforts. So those are the 3 sort of broad pillars of our mandate.
Where can CF members access your services? Is there any one central base or multiple centers across Canada?
At present, we are a centralized service, so we do have a 1-800 number as well as a website for people to contact us by email if they so choose. But we are in the process of developing plans to expand our services into regional centers.
And how have the services provided since 2015 informed the growth and development of the center?
The demand, certainly, as I mentioned in my opening comments, the demand for our services has increased steadily year over year. So the volume of calls that we get has certainly increased over time and has increased in the last couple of months, as you can imagine. We use that information to inform the development, the expansion, or the refinement of our services. So, for example, we used the data that we've collected over the last 5 years to do an analysis to help us plan for the regional expansion, for example, to look at particular regions or locations that perhaps ought to be prioritized over other locations.
Can you discuss how the center addresses the military sexual trauma, both as a support services and research for policy change, especially in the pandemic?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Can you discuss how the center addresses the military sexual trauma, both as a support services and a research for policy change? What was the impact of the pandemic during this time?
In terms of how the center addresses military sexual trauma as a support service, I mean, we provide the same range of support services to anyone who calls us, you know, whether regardless of the type of incident that's happened to them or the severity of the impacts that people are experiencing. But what we do is we make appropriate referrals with the member's consent. And so if they simply want information from us, we provide that. But if their needs, whether they're physical, psychological, or spiritual, we would, with the member's consent, make the appropriate referral so that they actually get access to the type of specialized care that they need to address the extent of their symptoms or the impact. In terms of research for policy change, what we are well connected to the research branch of the Canadian Armed Forces, and so we definitely contribute research projects into that research program. We review, for example, policies or programs that are related to sexual misconduct to provide advice in terms of considerations that need to be taken into consideration to ensure that they're trauma informed, that they're survivor centered, that they address the range of needs. We're also currently developing a national survivor support strategy, which would also take into consideration the range of needs that those who experience military sexual trauma need to have addressed.
Thank you, Dr. Preston. Like women, men, members of the LGBTQ community, visible minorities, indigenous members of the armed forces also experience sexual misconduct and other forms of harassment. Can you speak to how the armed forces is able to address these issues from the intersectional point?
Is that question for me or for General Atherton?
Dr. Preston, if you can give the answer, and then General can add on that, that will be good.
You are absolutely correct that the two Statistics Canada surveys that have been done absolutely identify that members of the groups that you've identified experience sexual misconduct at higher rates than other groups. And you're absolutely correct that men are also victims of sexual misconduct. And how we take this into consideration in terms of our work, for example, is that we do consult with the stakeholders, the representatives of the defense advisory groups for all of these groups of individuals to ensure that our work is appropriately informed to meet the needs of these individuals. We seek the input of subject matter experts with these types of expertise. So currently on a consultation group we have right now, we have someone who specializes in working with men. We also have someone who specializes in Indigenous issues as well. And so we always strive to ensure that we have appropriate consultants advising all of the work that we do.
And you're out of time. So now we're going to Madame Larouche, 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes, Ms. Larouche. Thank you very much, General Atherton, and thank you, Dr. Preston, for the work that you are doing. Of course, I want to start with some comments that you made in your presentation. You talked, General Atherton, about Supreme Court Justice Deschamps' review, and I want to know how you have dealt with those recommendations, because in 2019, a number of the recommendations hadn't been entirely implemented. So I would like to hear from you on that.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for the question. So when we released the path in the fall, and then shortly after was the policy document that very clearly outlined the duties and responsibilities related to sexual misconduct. That, from our perspective, answered all 10 of Madame Deschamps' recommendations, as well as the recommendations from the OIG. So we have made a lot of progress since 2019. In that time, since 2019, the final work would have gone into the release of the path. So we, from our perspective, we believe that we have achieved all those 10 recommendations. However, that is our opinion, and we still require our audit committee to look at it and confirm that that is our understanding of it. But again, a lot of work has been done since 2019 to get us to that point to release that strategy, particularly when it came to getting expert opinion and external advice to make sure that we were releasing it, that it has expert informed care and has a victim-centric approach and is aimed at culture change.
Thank you. General Atherton, on Tuesday, the Provost Marshal indicated that there had to be a certain threshold in order to be able to go forward with cases. Can you just talk about that threshold, please?
Madam Chair, thank you very much for the question. So we have taken a very broad definition of what sexual misconduct is, right up into, as we heard from the last panel, right up into the criminal. But again, to preserve the integrity and the independence of the military police branch, they are allowed a certain amount of latitude to look at the evidence, and then given that they've got that authority, they determine whether it is or isn't a code of service discipline offense, or whether it warrants a charge in accordance with the Criminal Code of Canada. So, every case is slightly different, and again, it depends on the professionalism and the dedication of those individuals that investigate those incidents.
Well, in terms of investigations, perhaps Dr. Preston, you could talk about sexual assault that would come under the criminal law system and sexual misconduct that would stay within the military. I know that there is apparently a different definition, and I would like to know whether you apply a different system.
Well, the first thing, Madam Chair, I should note is that the Sexual Misconduct Response Center is not a reporting center. What we do have a military police liaison officer who is a member of the National Investigation Service who works with us. And so we are able to facilitate reporting with the consent of an individual who calls us, but we do not actually take reports at the SMRC. But what I would note about definitions is, as General Atherton has said, the CAF uses a very broad definition of sexual misconduct that goes up to and including cases that would meet criminal code definitions for sexual assault or other types of sexual offenses. I'm not.
Very well. General Atherton, I understand that you provide services, but the center is not a reporting center. So could you, General Atherton, talk about the distinction between the types of misconduct that are criminal or that are dealt with by the military?
Madam Chair, I believe that the Provost Marshal or somebody from the JAGS organization is much better positioned to answer that in specifics. But I will say that we do have a very broad definition of what sexual misconduct is, as I've said, that goes right up to the criminal, but also to target those sorts of inappropriate behaviors that are less or more minor, if I can use those terms, because those are the ones that we believe, if left unchecked, can lead to more serious types of behavior.
So, thank you. Perhaps we can come back to that, but when it comes to the definitions and the various levels, there seem to be barriers. Do you find that there are obstacles to people who would like to complain about misconduct? I'm afraid your time is up.
For 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the witnesses, so one of the reasons why we're discussing all of this is ultimately because in a horrible situation, the Ombudsman had approached the Minister of Defense, not knowing where to go with an allegation, and the Ombudsman was unwilling to release the information from a complainant because that complainant had no assurances that they would be protected, that they would be that they could be kept, that the allegations could be kept, that they would be protected from that in their chain of command. We've heard a lot about from witnesses directly saying that confidentiality doesn't exist, that one witness, Madam Raymond, talked about her hearing her direct commander or people talking about her case in the hallway when they weren't speaking to her directly. Can you talk about, I mean, I know, Ms. Preston, you talked about that confidentiality and that importance, but there seems to be a disconnect here. So can you both address that?
Certainly, I can start. So all of the services that we provide at the SMRC are confidential. And so we are the one safe space that CAF members have to call to talk about what's happened to them. And knowing that that we are receiving that information and keeping it in confidence until such time as they decide they would like to take action with that information. So in practice, we would never release information about any individual caller without their consent or when the usual limits to confidentiality apply. So for example, if there's imminent risk to an individual. But I can say that those cases, that has never happened in the 6 years the center has been operating.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for the question. We have a significant amount of policies that are in place to protect an individual who comes forward with a complaint. It's been very clearly articulated in the policy document we released in the fall. The amount of personal and moral courage that an individual must have to come forward to make a complaint of this nature is beyond my comprehension to know it, but I having been a commanding officer and a formation commander, I know how challenging, how difficult that is. That being said, we do have a number of policies that are there to protect the individual, but part of the work that we need to do going forward is to understand what those barriers are. As part of the work and the successes that we've worked through Op Honor is to try and eliminate those barriers and provide a number of different options. But as we've seen and as we've heard, there are barriers that are there and we need to work through them and we need to find out what they are. But certainly there is a rigid system in place to protect the individual and to protect them from any forms of repercussions. The role of the peer group and the role of the bystander will also play a significant role in here in terms of what they need to do, what they have to, what role they will play, certainly as part of a member of their team and to protect a member of their team as well. So a lot more work to do in this regard, particularly in understanding what those barriers are to reporting and what those barriers that would be to make an individual concerned or scared to come forward when they clearly have something that they need to say.
So earlier this week in testimony, this committee also heard that there was the difference between, as you're talking about those policies, those number of policies, the idea of that confidentiality being supreme, the formal and informal leadership. And it seems like there's we're talking about a lot of the same things here, right? There are the policies on the books, the leadership formally that can be provided in terms of education, in terms of what we say. Even in just the last panel, there's what we say, and they talked about what we say and what we do. So maybe you could discuss that as well in terms of that formal, informal leadership and some of the recommendations that you would have to increase both in terms of protection of the confidentiality and protection of women, all minorities or disproportionately affected groups going forward within the CAF.
Madam Chair, I guess I'll take the first attempt at this. Part of our culture change strategy is very much the effect, exactly as you said. We have some very clear, mapped out, clearly published what we expect our core values to be, and also that we have identified that there is, in some cases, a variation from those things. The other part of this is targeting those junior leaders and leaders at every level, quite frankly, and understanding the role that they will play in establishing command climate and culture within their organization. So part of this is very much educating leaders at every level to understand how significant effect they have and significant effect that they may have on barriers to reporting. Also, part of the work that we will start looking for, and part of the look as part of this culture change, is for every member of the CAF to understand where they fit in the whole process and where they see themselves and that they are, in fact, part of this process to change culture. and understanding the effect that it has on individuals who are harmed and the role that they must play in ensuring that they have the care that they need.
And now we'll go to Ms. Alislav in the second round for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. General Atherton, you can tell that my colleagues are somewhat struggling with the actual responsibility and role of your position. Could you give us an idea what authority, accountability you have, and what are the key objectives that your position is working to achieve?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the question. It's a very good question. So I am an element of the office of the CDS, as it were, but my day-to-day reporting is directly to the Vice. But I have the opportunity and the ability to work with all of the different services to work through the programs that we're trying to put in place. And part of my original mandate, or my expanded mandate, is to look at all those aspects of culture that we need and what we want to be the embodiment of what Canada wants as members of the armed forces. So that is my mandate, and also to put policies into play that support those type of things. But also part of it is to work with professionals like Dr. Preston, to work with our external stakeholders, to work with experts to understand, are the policies that we've put in place effective, and where can we do better? How can we improve? And particularly as we move on to the next step of this journey, where can we help? What can we do better? And that's really part of my mandate is also work with the chain of command, but also to work with external stakeholders to provide that expert advice that we so need.
So the key, of course, is around the metrics. You said you've made steady progress. How do you know that? How are you measuring that progress?
We measure progress in a number of different ways. A lot of it is through reporting, the numbers of reporting, how we track that, accuracy of reporting. We have a very dedicated reporting system that we track incidents throughout the course of the year. We work with the chain of command for accuracy. We work with them for auditing and provide them feedback and advice on how they can be better. It's that accuracy of reporting will help us determine the rate of increase or decrease or change on the reporting for sexual misconduct. But we also will work with things like StatsCan surveys, unit surveys, things like that to understand what command climates are out there, and then being able to work with some of the academic bodies that we have to understand and help us better understand what the results are, so then we can design programs to fit.
So we've seen that much of these policies and procedures have been in place for a long time. The military had sharp training back in the 90s, Op Honor. This is not a new thing. And so it's not a question necessarily of the military not understanding what's expected, what the values of Canadian society are. It's about individuals not meeting that behavior. How are you measuring that, and how are you measuring the accountability of those individuals to meet those processes and standards for behavior?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you very much for the question. We have said that sexual misconduct must never be minimized, excused, or ignored. And that is paramount through everything that we do.
And yet we know that it has been. So how
absolutely,
are we
Madam Chair. Absolutely, Madam Chair. And that's exactly why, as we move through the next step of this journey, is to understand what we did well, what are the successes, what were the positive aspects of Op Honor, but also where we did not, where we went wrong, and what were some of the negative aspects of it. But we're also seeing is part of that aspect of the path, understanding culture change and our ethos being very much embedded into our education and training systems. It starts right at the recruit school and works its way through leadership training, junior leadership training, officer training, senior leader training as well, to understand that this is an important part of operational effectiveness and to make people an essential part of our team.
And will you be reviewing the practices at RMC? Because we've heard from witnesses that that is obviously an incredibly strong culture, as you and I were both there 100 years ago.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that That is a very good question. A part of my, as was asked, part of my role is to work with other stakeholders, to include the military colleges, to look at their training and education systems. We have a training and education organization within my with my directorate that works with the Defense Academy to understand and make sure that they're putting in place all these training and education systems that we want. That is in line with the path and is in line with Operation Honor.
We have great confidence in you, and we wish you great success.
Very good. Now we'll go to Ms. Dillon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for their very compelling testimony today. I'll start with Dr. Preston. The SMRC also offers policy recommendations, and one highlighted issue is the duty to report. Recently, Acting Chief of Defense Staff here discussed here at committee to change the words duty to report to duty to respond. Based on your research, why do you think this change is so crucial, and why is it being received so well by survivors and advocates? What is the significance of this word change? Thank you.
The duty to report, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. The duty to report has been a significant issue for us at the SMRC, for a variety of expert stakeholders who have provided advice over the years, and from survivors themselves. Because effectively what the duty to report does is disempowers victims and survivors, because it removes all agency from them in terms of deciding whether they want to report what's happened to them, when they want to report, and to whom they want to report. And so one of the things that the statistics show is that of all the reports of sexual assault that are made to the chain of command, 40% of them are made by third parties. And that is really a significant impact on survivors. So the duty to report, significant impact on survivors as well. It's really what we're looking for in a policy is sufficient latitude to either provide for exemptions for certain people to not be held to the duty to report. So, for example, healthcare providers or the victims themselves, should not be subject to the duty to report. But what we're also looking for in policy would be if third-party reports are made, that it still goes back to the victim to A, inform them that has happened, but B, to not move forward in responding until the victim chooses that they want this to go forward. So it would be a significant change for the survivor community if the duty to report could be more effectively addressed.
And you spoke about in your opening statement the need for a meaningful cultural change. We know in the CAF there is a very highly sexualized culture, very toxic environment. Do you think to bring about this change, it's also important to understand why the perpetrators do what they do? And I'm trying to understand this, and I asked the Honorable Justice who came and testified a few weeks ago before us, what makes somebody behave in this manner towards another person? Somebody whose duty is to swear to protect others is out there harassing and assaulting them. Can you please explain what can compel somebody to do this and what we can do to understand this to bring about meaningful cultural change? Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. It's an important question, but I do want to preface it by saying that sometimes people react when we talk about perpetrators because they think that in talking about perpetrators, we're negating the impact of culture. And that is absolutely not the case. This is a very complex problem that requires intervention at multiple levels, both at the individual level, but also at the cultural and the organizational level. So, I mean, there are many. So if you look at people who commit this kind of behavior, there are many different risk factors or different things that cause them to behave the way they do. So there are certainly individual factors in terms of attitudes, values, beliefs, use of alcohol. So there's a range of things about the individual, but they commit these behaviors within a culture and within a context. And so if there is a culture that is sexualized, that is permissive, that is a culture of silence, it emboldens them and protects them from accountability as well. And so really, so we do need to do a better job of understanding who is doing this within the CAF, because we do not have a good understanding of who is doing it, why they're doing it, who they're doing it to, and under what circumstances. And that is critical to being able to design better prevention programs and response programs as well. So what is important is to make sure that there are effective responses to hold individual perpetrators accountable. That will go a long way to making people trust in the system if they actually see tangible evidence of individuals being held appropriately accountable. But we also need to ensure that the environment, that changes are made within the environment so that it is no longer a permissive environment that enables or promotes this type of behavior to happen.
Very good. And now we'll go to Madame Larouche. 2,5 minutes.
You have 2.5 minutes, Ms. Larouche. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to address my question to Brigadier General Atherton. In your presentation, you talked about Operation Honor culminating and ending. How do you think it was overall as a success?
Madam Chair, thank you very much for that very, very, very important question. So culminating is important to understand what we mean by that term. It means that it's from a military operation perspective, it's got to its logical point that it doesn't matter how many more resources we put at this, we cannot advance it anymore. It also, if we've seen over the events of the last number of months, there is a significant amount of negativity that's now associated with that. And so it's come to the point that we need to look at something else, and we need to develop what our next approach is. We also need, as we look at this, in how we close out Operation Honor will be just as important as how we brought it into being. There is a significant amount of emotional that's tied to this, both good and bad. We also need to really look at the successes that we've had. We've heard a number of them today. We've made a significant amount of progress in the last number of years. We've got a significant amount of education and training programs that are in place. There's a lot of institutional knowledge about it, but also we have to look at where we didn't do well. We need to look at some of those unintended consequences of these programs. We also need to look at what those barriers were, and we need to talk to the people who were most affected by this to understand what we need to do. And certainly these last number of months and the situation that we're in is really identified what we don't know. And we need to talk to our people. We need to listen to our people. We need to engage with our people to understand how we can move forward and how we can be a much more effective force and be the embodiment of everything that the Canadians expect of us.
Thank you very much. Dr. Preston, you talked about trauma and how a victim-centered approach needs... I'm sorry.
We'll go to Ms. Matheson for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. General Atherton, you said earlier that between 2015 and 2019, you worked very hard to put forward and change to meet what was listed, all the recommendations that were listed by the Deschamps report. And yet, I find it, and I've used this word a lot, this disconnect, because we heard directly from Madame Deschamps just a few weeks ago, and she stated clearly that she didn't feel that those recommendations had been met. So could you talk about why that could be, or again, that disconnect, so that I could better understand?
So part of the, as we worked through the development of the path and the policy document, we worked with external stakeholders like Madame Deschamps and others to try and understand how we can try to better understand and have a victim-centric approach. But as we went through, we released the path to stakeholders in a draft format for them to look at and provide their feedback. And for the most part, we had endorsement of what we were doing. And there were a number of different recommendations for changes that we have implemented. So now it comes out to an external organization, our Defense Audit Committee, who will look at that and really determine from an external perspective, from an audit perspective, whether in fact we as a department, as an armed forces, have actually achieved those 10 recommendations. So again, it's our perspective as we release that document that yes, we have done the 10 recommendations, but to be valid and to be accurate, we need an external piece that will look at it. And I believe that will probably handle, to some extent, some of that disconnect that you were talking about.
So you'll definitely take into account the fact that the author of the report doesn't necessarily believe that they have been met. I also am a bit confused because I had asked Madame Deschamps directly as well, had she been consulted directly, and she said that she hadn't, but you're saying that you did work with her directly since the release of the report. Could you just clarify that a little bit as well?
As we worked through the process to get the path up and running and released took a number of years. There are a number of different sort of stakeholders that were involved, and certainly in the final days just before release, we worked with Madame Deschamps and gave her a copy of it and went through it with her to explain what it was and everything along those lines. But again, a lot of that work that happened was previous to my time, but certainly I can only comment on what we did in the final days to get it out into the public eye.
All right, and now we'll go to Ms. Shin for 5 minutes.
I'd like to thank both witnesses for joining us today. These are difficult conversations, but I applaud you for showing up and speaking with moral courage. The first set of questions I'd like to ask is for Dr. Denise Preston. And Dr. Preston, the Sexual Misconduct Response Center mandate is to provide services to military personnel who have been the victim of sexual assault or misconduct. Are you automatically notified when someone files a complaint, or does the victim need to seek you out?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. We are not automatically notified when a victim makes a complaint. Victims need to reach out to us, to call us, and so therefore it's very important that we engage in ongoing outreach and to raise awareness and to make sure that people that the victims might actually interact with at the unit level are aware of the SMRC and sort of as a first response will refer them to us. So no, we're not automatically informed of all complaints. And as I mentioned, people very often will call us not because they want to make a complaint, it's because they want to talk about what's happened to them. In some cases, they're not even sure if what's happened to them is a form of sexual misconduct. And so we're there to listen and to validate what has happened to them and to provide whatever information or support or referrals they might require.
It's great that your services are accessible. On that note, the part about second guessing if something was a reality or not, and some of the gaslighting in the culture that is there, what does some of your outreach look like in trying to help women come forward and not feel like they need to second guess?
So we tend to send teams out to, we have sort of a 3-year outreach plan where we travel to all the bases and wings across the country in that time frame. We send a team out, and that team is comprised of some of our counselors. There's always a member of the management team, and as well we have a military liaison officer who goes on those outreach sessions with us. While we're there, we deliver a number of different different group sessions with people. Typically, the sessions are divided by rank. And we also meet with all of the command teams as well to talk about the services that we provide. And what I can say to you is that every single time we've gone out and done outreach, we have had at least one, if not more people come hang around and talk to us and do an actual disclosure of an incident. And typically after a visit, for the first couple of weeks after we've been at a particular site, we receive an increase in calls from that particular site as well. So the outreach definitely pays dividends, putting faces to names for people.
Thank you so much for doing that. I think that is so valuable. So recently, the committee heard from Ms. Raymond, whose experience is well known, and she told us that one of the challenges she faced was that as a Francophone, was the inability to access these services in French. In Canada is a bilingual country where Canadians have the right to expect and receive services in their language of choice, whether that is English or French. Can you please inform us of the steps you take to ensure these obligations are met?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Absolutely, all of the members of my counseling team are fully bilingual, and so therefore members across the country, across the world, in fact, because we offer 24/7 services, there's always fully bilingual people who will respond to the calls. And we are also Quebec will be one of the regions that we expand to and provide regional services.
Great. Dr. Preston, recently in a media article, you stated that complaints against senior leaders of the Canadian Armed Forces are a sign of progress, not failure. But the fact that those allegations are being raised in the media rather than directly to the military shows there is a lack of trust in the reporting process among the ranks. And you also made mention of your concern that the SMRC isn't truly independent because your budget is still tied to the Department of National Defense, and that the military doesn't provide you with all of the necessary information requests. Do you believe that in order to properly address and handle sexual misconduct and assaults, that a truly independent body outside of the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces is needed to gain the trust of our military personnel and to truly address the culture within the military?
I think that regardless of what sort of mechanism is set up, whether it's for support or whether it's for reporting and investigation, what is of fundamental importance is that it's in the best interest of survivors. So that's what we need to take as our starting point in designing or perhaps redesigning some of the structures that we already have. What I can tell you with respect to reporting is the two biggest complaints we hear from survivors are about the duty to report, which we've already talked about, and all of the negative effects of that on members. But also the other thing that they ask for is an ability to make a report that is outside of the chain of command. So it's specifically outside their own chain of command, but what they're looking for is an independent reporting entity and an independent investigative entity.
Very good. And now we'll go to Ms. Vandenbeld for the last 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'll be directing my questions to Dr. Preston. Thank you so much for the work that you do at the SMRCs. And I'm just going to ask you a very open-ended question. In an ideal world, if resources were not in question, how would you expand the SMRCs? What would you see in terms of an ideal role, mandate, resources? What would you like to see?
I would like to see, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. If resources were not a question, again, I would take as my starting point a comprehensive set of supports and services for members that best meet their needs. And so that needs to start with hearing from survivors themselves about what it is that they actually want. And so if that turns out to be SMRC, or if it turns out to be something else, that's fine. I'm not wedded to a particular structure. I'm wedded to what's in the best interest of members. Ideally, what I would like to see is a culture where the sexualized nature is addressed, that people feel that they're included and respected, that incidents are appropriately prevented. but if incidents do happen, that there is accessible care regardless of where a member is. And so therefore I would like to see decentralized services. I would like them to feel safe coming forward to report. And so we definitely have to look at things like the duty to report and whether there's an option for independent reporting and investigation, that they are free from reprisal as well. And so that members, when they do make a report, they have an advocate or a source of support that accompanies them from the time they come forward until such time as they don't need that support anymore to be able to support and address reprisals in real time. So I think those are a range of things that I would like to see in place.
And looking more broadly than the SMRCs, you've been following this discussion very closely. I know, in both committees and also a number of discussions that are happening at Defense. What would be some key recommendations that you would have for the Defense team that may not have already been mentioned in this committee, or what are the key gaps that you see that we need to put forward in order to find solutions for this?
Yeah, I think I think that there are a range of things that need to happen. But what I would like to see, I think one of the important things to think about is the approach that is taken to address some of the gaps and the issues. I think, what I've seen and certainly what I've experienced in the last number of years that I've worked on this file is that it's very reactive. We're constantly directing our efforts to the crisis of the day or the issue of the day, what has arisen, without sort of stepping back and taking a more strategic or comprehensive view of the issue and making sure that we sort of look at processes from beginning to end with a survivor lens to really look at where are the gaps or the issues at every single part of a process in order to make sure that there is consistent trauma-informed, survivor-centered support or response from beginning to end.
And what about intersectionality? We know that not everybody experiences it the same, and there might be different needs for racialized members or LGBTQ. Is there enough data or research on the intersectionality?
At present, there is not a huge amount of data. There is some information that was in both of the StatsCan reports. However, the need for further information on the experiences of these intersectional groups has been raised with the CAF's research department, and so they are currently either developing or conducting studies. I'm not quite sure where they're at, but they are looking at very focused studies, looking at members from all of these various groups to better understand their experience and their needs.
And often we know when people come forward, it's not immediately, I want an investigation, I want punitive measures against the perpetrator. Often it's a series of stages that the survivor goes through, starting with maybe needing counseling, then perhaps peer support, then perhaps other steps. And at that point, she might be ready to say, yes, I want to formally report a complaint. So how does SMRC assist the survivors to get from the various different stages and the various different needs that they may have over the course of time?
Quickly, in a few seconds.
Yes, that's exactly what SMRC does, either by referring people to the appropriate support services or through our own response and support coordination service where members are assigned a single point of contact at SMRC and we support them throughout their journey. And, members define what their journey is. We are not leading them to reporting. We're leading them or supporting them to access what they want. But once they decide they're ready to report, we help facilitate that as well, including accompanying them.
Very good. And I want to thank you for your leadership, both of you, and to our witnesses today, and also for your patience and staying late. Now, for the rest of the committee, is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Seeing that it is, I shall see you then on Tuesday for our next meeting on this subject. Thank you so much.